Let Stephen. Let him be Stephen. Hello, I'm Hayden.Bloomfield and welcome to the channel. So we've had Matt Hancock on The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. There's been quite the polarization of opinions as to whether this was a great guest to have or whether this was a terrible guest to have, with the idea of giving the spotlight and the opportunity to someone on such a platform, such a popular podcast, the likes of a politician, to speak with regards to the pandemic, post-pandemic, and the whole situation throughout lockdown 1, 2, 3, 4, however many there were. And so in this video, I just want to go through my own response and reflection. I listened to the conversation, I went in with open ears, and I will admit from my standpoint, I did not really pay much attention to the mainstream media. I kept up with guidelines and such, but overall, on a general basis, I tend not to consume too much of mainstream media or the news, purely because of how toxic and negative it is and can be. But firstly, on the affair with Matt Hancock and now having a divorce and that sort of situation going on, he really fluffed it there, I will say, regardless of lockdown regulations, where they were, whatever. There's spoken about he broke the lockdown rules or whatever, and in the conversation said about there were guidelines at the time of the affair. There wasn't actual rules, it was just guidelines in terms of how to act and the advice. In terms of that point, I recognise that they worked closely together, so they, regardless of what they were up to physically, pretty much they were probably having to just work so close. I mean, if you had it, I think we all did, in certain environments, in certain roles, in certain jobs, you just couldn't keep a distance from one another. But ultimately, he's fluffed it there, having an affair and like breaking down that marriage. And that's something that just comes with human error. And I think like a lot of humans go through this mistake, or whether it's a mistake or it's the right thing, whatever you would call it. And I suppose that's subjective. Every situation has a different outcome as to whether it was a mistake or the right move forward for them. But he's done it in the public light, so that's never going to bode well for him. And in the subject of this, regardless of what the regulations were, if you're in the spotlight is one thing, but he is a key member of parliament, of the group of politicians that are making these decisions, guiding us and setting the example to us, to then be someone that's setting the example using a loose regard for the regulations. You've kind of fluffed it there, mate. He admitted the mistake, which I think you can't really ask for him to do much more than just say, look, I was in the wrong, messed it up here. These were the rules and regulations at the time. I appreciate the fact that it takes a lot of honesty in front to actually be able to say that on such a platform that will be seen and heard by so many people. But what I took away from it, in listening to this conversation, hearing him speak around the events and circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just, it reflects and points out and really demonstrates the toxicity of the mainstream media and the lengths that will be gone to in order to get a headline, to get clickbait, to generate that advertising revenue, is just shocking, to draw their attention in, to just give rise to fear. It's just full of FUD. Matt Hancock makes examples of this, and Stephen asked him on certain points within the whole proceedings of COVID, with the headlines that were coming out, for example, of Matt Hancock having a friend with a pub or whatever, and he's got a business, and then suddenly his mate had contracts and such, and then Matt breaks down what the information is and what the facts are, and as well as stuff regarding where his own shares are and what, or where his own investments are, and companies that were coming up. And it was just, it's something that you see in a lot of things. If you've ever been involved in the inside of a news media story, you know exactly what this is, and you know exactly what it's like. There is just a story that will be blown completely out of proportion. The facts and figures will all be misaligned and misjudged and just outwardly wrong. You get this a lot with Tesla and Elon Musk, especially, like the amount of FUD that comes out and just completely falsified information, or something that's so insignificant and small, or it will just be something that's relevant to every company or every automaker, but then they'll just, when it is apparent for Tesla, it's like, well, suddenly it's a headline, or it's like, well, all other car companies have this and often it's worse, and yet you're pointing out for Tesla. So it's what gets headlines, it what baits people in to click that button to engage with that article. And oftentimes you read the headline and then suddenly the article itself is actually a lot more neutral, and it's not so aggressive. It's just the headline to draw you in and get that clickbait. And I think it just points out and demonstrates to us that we really need to have a mainstream media that is incentivized differently in the way in which it's reporting, and to make it more of a honest, to give it more of an honest philosophy around how it updates us with the latest news. I wouldn't say it's not a platform that I would go to get the latest updates on what is going on. I would sooner be on YouTube watching videos than going to the mainstream media. But overall, throughout the whole lockdown, through the situation of the guidance and everything, I think Matt Hancock, as well as everybody else, that was involved in lockdown, the decisions and the regulations, they had an impossible task, and they took the information they had. And people talk about on reflection, oh, if they made lockdown a week earlier, that would have saved X amount of lives. We don't know the exact figure, but it's just in the region of tens of thousands of lives. But then Matt explains about the data they were getting in and the fact that they had to start working out how to collect so much data, and that only improved with time throughout the lockdowns and throughout the pandemic. But I think they were doing something that was just incredibly impossible. And I don't think anyone would really want to be in that situation. And I think regardless of what they did, you're polarizing the population. You are going to have people of all extremes. There's going to be people that are backing and agree and are all for what you're saying. There's going to be people that are completely against it, and there's going to be people that make headlines about it. So it doesn't matter what decision you make. They could have done lockdown from the second that they heard of this thing called a coronavirus in January. And I feel like there would have been a lot of negativity towards that. I mean, it would have saved a lot of issues and saved a lot of lives. But overall, and it's getting that insight, getting that information really does show how difficult it was, and that it was quite difficult to actually understand the data, and for them to actually ascertain the right data to ensure that they were making the right decision based on what they had. And the fact it was changing so quickly, I don't envy the situation. I was actually surprised when asked the question, if you knew you was going into another pandemic, would you still be the health secretary? And surprisingly, Matt said yes, which I find very surprising. But I wouldn't want to do the job. I definitely wouldn't want to do the job. I don't envy them. I think regardless of what your opinion is, or my opinion, I'm not going to say I have an opinion because I don't feel I've studied it enough. But I think in listening to this conversation, to this episode of Diary of a CEO, I'm glad it happened. And I think it was a great decision to have this conversation. And it's given me a great insight. And it's just reinforced my opinion of mainstream media, and that we should stick to platforms such as YouTube. So great choice for getting some news on YouTube and getting some opinions and thoughts and updates on YouTube. And if you're liking the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But the last thing I want to discuss within this is just the actual response towards Stephen Bartlett, people's reactions and thoughts, feelings around Matt Hancock coming on to Diary of a CEO to talk. Stephen put it quite well, is if you're not doing things to piss people off, you're clearly not making enough of an impact, which I think is true. It doesn't matter what you do or who you are. If you gain enough of the spotlight, you will have people hating, disliking and detesting what you're actually doing. And people will talk about, oh, Matt Hancock shouldn't have been given the time of day, he shouldn't be on the platform, why the hell are you putting him on the podcast? But the thing to recognise and remember and stand by is the fact that whose platform is this? It's Stephen Bartlett's platform. Whose podcast is it? It's Stephen Bartlett's podcast. Who started the podcast? Stephen Bartlett started the podcast. Who's in charge of it going forward? Who decides who future guests are, past guests are, and current guests are? Who gets to have the conversation? Stephen Bartlett. So who gets to make the ultimate decision? Stephen Bartlett. Like, if you do not like who the guest is, there's an episode every week. Although today, Stephen Bartlett announced that there will be 2 episodes, Monday and Thursday. We'll get 2 episodes a week of Diary of a CEO. Great news. You've got 2 episodes a week to listen to. If you do not like one of the guests, great tip for you. Skip the episode. Just don't listen to it. There's no obligation to listen to it. Yes, you enjoy it. I enjoy the platform. I enjoy the podcast. I think it's really phenomenal. I'll probably listen to every episode regardless of who the guest is. In honesty, when I listened to Molly May's episode, I didn't really like Molly May, but that's because I didn't know anything. I just knew her as being some sort of glamorous influencer type that was on Love. I didn't know she was on Love, but that kind of person. And I just instinctively, my judgment, my prejudice is that I just don't like the people that are on those shows. But that's my prejudice. And once I actually listened to the episode, I did take a lot of positives away from it. So, and I did make a video responding to that episode as well. And I think that's the thing to remember. And if you control a platform, if it's your life, then it doesn't matter what people think. If you want to do something, then follow it. Go for it. If it's within the rules and regulations and the laws of life, and you're not harming anyone, you're just doing what you enjoy, and if it can benefit others, brilliant. But otherwise, let Stephen. Let him be Stephen. If he wants to have a conversation with Matt Hancock, if he wants to have a conversation with Boris Johnson, Molly May, whoever he has on, Ed Sheeran, I don't know, there might be a future guest one day. Whoever he wants to have a conversation with, he can, and I stand by that. And I think he's doing a phenomenal job, and I look forward to the podcast now having 2 episodes a week, and I think it will go into far greater places than it already has. So I look forward to it. But otherwise, let me know your thoughts below in the comments. And as I said, if you've liked the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel because you'll get plenty more. Till the next one.